Right. Today is June 20th, 2011. I'm Jason Gum, and we're at the home of Mr. Joe Kemper, interviewing him about his service in the military. Could you please give me your full name as it is recorded on your birth certificate, sir?
It's Joseph Clark Kemper.
Okay. Do you have a nickname?
Just go by Joe.
Okay. Is that what you were known as in the military, Joe?
Joe.
Okay. Where were you born and raised, sir?
I was born in the house right there, about 300 yards up the creek from here.
Okay.
And birth certificate, of course, is in Glenville. And raised here to the age of 10. Then we moved into Weston.
Uh-huh.
Went to Weston High School. Other than that, I went to school at Troy.
Okay. What was your job in the military?
I was an airplane mechanic. They called us crew chief, but we had small airplanes, so there was just one person in the crew.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Where was your basic training held at?
Went through Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic training.
Uh-huh.
And then after that, that was 2 months or a little longer. I came home for a couple of days and then went down to Fort Rucker, Alabama for advanced training in aircraft maintenance.
I see. Do you have any stories or any sort of recollections or thoughts about your original training that you'd like to convey?
I don't know what's important about it, other than the fact that it took about 2 seconds after I was sworn in to realize I wasn't a military material.
Uh-huh.
Just because of their mannerisms. I guess you could call it rudeness. It's just military crudeness to break people of their home habits and turn them in basically to killers is where you got to get people.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I had a good time. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Mm-hmm. But I knew within moments that I wasn't going to stay in the military.
Mm-hmm.
But I went into basic training. They give you a test as you go in, a physical test. I was in the top. There was 3 of us that made the top rating in it. And when I came out, I got pneumonia in the middle of the thing. It was winter, January. Mm-hmm. And I barely passed to come out the bottom end at about the 3rd from the bottom, as far as physical condition. But I got through it and went on from there. Quit spitting up blood not long after I got out of basic.
Okay. Did the later aviation training you have, how was that?
I enjoyed it because I liked mechanics and I wanted to be in aviation. I really went in the Army thinking about going through and becoming a pilot in the Army, but I would have had to sign up for another 5 years after I got out of training, and I wasn't willing to do that. But training in Fort Rucker was good, and it served me all my life. I've added to it, of course, when I got out. So.
What did you do as a civilian career?
As a civilian, after I got out of the Army, I used a GI Bill to go through mechanic training, aircraft mechanic out in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at Spartan School of Aeronautics. That was a 2-year course. And then moved down to Florida. Eastern Airlines actually flew us to Florida to my wife and I to take a job with them as a mechanic, but I'm not a union man either, so by the time I realized the restrictions of a union, I took a job at a small airport in general aviation and got my flight training at Burnside Ott in just north of Miami.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And I should mention after that, Kathy and I, we accepted Christ and went to South America for 20 years as missionary pilot, flying Peru and Bolivia, Amazon jungle to the Andes Mountains. Okay. Small airstrips. It was pretty similar to Vietnam, except they weren't shooting at us as much. They did shoot some.
So the first experience with aviation training was in the military?
Yes. Yeah.
But you didn't fly. You learned.
Right. Yeah. I learned how to fly in the military because it was a 2-seat airplane. We had trained observers, but when they weren't available, we would jump in the back seat. And of course, they had a rule that you couldn't shoot. The pilot couldn't shoot out the window if he didn't have somebody flying the plane from the back seat. Because one of the guys let the gun get away from him and almost shot himself down. So we got to fly, but not as much as I would have liked.
Okay. What was your first duty station after basic training?
After basic and then after advanced training in Alabama, I went to Germany, to just outside of Munich, in a depot maintenance, which is a higher level maintenance for aircraft. We were living in a bombed-out hangar left over from World War II. The buildings and offices end of it were still intact, and the middle was out of it, but just down from us was a hangar that was still functional, and we worked out of that one. Still had big shrapnel holes through the sides of it and through the beams in it from World War II. And then after that I transferred up to a 661st, I guess it was, and was a crew chief on a 6-passenger Beaver. Was the only airplane in that particular headquarters company, so we flew the military executives all over Germany.
Okay. What were a breakdown of some of the duties you performed? I mean, regular duties on these aircraft.
It was just general day-to-day maintenance. If it was an engine change, we did that. If it was an engine overhaul, we sent those off. Changing pieces like wings and tail feathers and landing gear, we did all of those kind of things. But we didn't rebuild a wing. We'd send the wing off to get it redone.
I see. Okay. How often, I mean, was it just hit and miss, I guess, with different wear and tear on the engines? I mean, how often would they need replaced or repaired?
Yeah. Well, normally an engine will run, 1,500 or 2,000 hours of flight time, which at worst in the military, in Vietnam we flew a lot more than we did in Germany per day. They should have lasted about a year, but they were lasting us sometimes a week. There were some engines that were poorly overhauled by civilian contractors that we got that just blew up pretty quickly. Plus we were operating in Vietnam in the sand, so the oil was always getting contaminated. The engines were sucking a lot of dirt, so they wore out. Even the ones that didn't blow up wore out pretty quickly. So we changed probably an engine a week out of 8 airplanes in Vietnam.
See. How did it work whenever, like, you'd get problems or an engine would blow or something during an actual flight?
The airplane went wherever. We in Vietnam, I was in a platoon that was assigned 8 pilots, 8 airplanes, 8 mechanics, and then 1 sergeant that was over the mechanics. And typically we had half of those 5 or 6 flyable. There were times when we were down to 1 or 2 that was flyable. So we were always scrambling to get them going. For the first probably 8 or 10 months, we didn't have a supply line established. I went over early in the war before everything was worked out. You know, when I first got there, we were getting paid in U.S. dollars, and everybody was carrying a 6-gunner. It looked like the Old West. It was pretty much a free country as far as military was concerned. So we did have a supply line, and we either, of course, traded for parts or stole them from the Air Force and the Marines. For months we did it that way because we didn't have a supply line, and fortunately for us, the Marines had just parked 5 of those bird dogs, very similar to ours, slightly different model, but the parts mostly were interchangeable. And they were sitting out on the back ramp there with no particular guard, so we pulled a lot of parts off of those. If it was standard instruments and things, we would horse trade with the Air Force until our platoon leader or company commander, somebody realized that we needed to establish a supply route, and they made us order every part that we stole, just so that even though we got the part we needed, 2 months later the part we ordered would come in. And that got better and faster by the time I left there. It was working pretty well.
Okay. Were all these repairs done outside?
All of them that we did at our level were done outside in the sand and the sun, and engine changes and parts changing to keep the airplanes going, and minor repairs, if it was something simple. But we had a maintenance hangar up near Hue, just outside of Hue at Hue Fubai, that if we could fly the plane up there, sometimes we took them up, slung under a helicopter to get them rebuilt. They had an inside hangar with all the equipment they needed to do major repairs.
Okay. Most was done outside on the base, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Can I ask you, what do you remember most about your time in Vietnam?
That would take days to go through all that. I enjoyed the excitement of it.
Mhm.
You know, it was a little bit almost like a dark cloud hanging over you because you never knew what was going to happen or when your turn might come to get shot. But I never did get even hit by a bullet.
Mhm.
Um, but it was exciting. My primary job, of course, other than keeping the airplane going, was I volunteered to go out and pick up all the planes that got shot down or crashed.
Mhm.
And we lost, in 14 months, we lost 14 airplanes. One of those was run out of gas, and a couple of them were accidents at little jungle strips,
Mhm.
but most of them were shot down. And the first one that went down, one of our pilots wanted to go rescue it, and he didn't understand static electricity buildup on a helicopter. When a helicopter's in the air flying, it's just a big static generator.
Uh-huh.
And when it gets close to the ground or close to somebody reaching up with a rope to hook it onto the belly hook, a bolt of lightning, up to 3 feet long will shoot out of your hand and hit the helicopter.
Uh-huh.
So he climbed up to do the first one, and it blew him off the top of the wing of our airplane. And after that, he didn't want to do it anymore. So
Uh-huh.
fortunately, I went over in Weston. I went through a radio class they just started the last year I was in school. And so I knew enough about electricity to know that all you got to do is have a piece of wire sticking to the ground in your hand, and it'll go through the wire rather than through your body.
Uh-huh.
So
Act as a ground.
yeah, it's a better conductor than your body. So
Uh-huh.
most of you could feel it, tingle, but it wasn't knocking you silly.
Mhm.
So after that, I enjoyed it. It was fun. There was no system. If we had an airplane shot down, when we got word of it through whatever system we got word through that there was a plane down, I would just have to find somebody with a helicopter that was willing to make the trip, either Army Hueys or some of the twin rotor Marine helicopters.
Mhm.
And generally, if you just walked into where they had, just like we did, they had a flight office, where all the pilots and mechanics hung out. Just walk in there and tell them you had a plane down, you needed a volunteer and a helicopter or two,
Mhm.
and somebody would jump up and go with you. And I just climbed in. I made up a set of tools so we could throw them in the helicopter and go out there. It was bolt cutters and basic wrenches and things.
Mhm.
And then the hookup, I strung a long steel cable together that I could use for a ground wire to hook up the things with.
Mhm.
And it never took more than a few minutes to find somebody who was willing to fly a helicopter out to pick up these planes, which was a little dangerous sometimes because you're hovering a helicopter above a battlefield, basically.
Mhm.
And we never lost any of those helicopters, never got shot down. But generally, the Marines or Army that was around where the plane went down would have already had a perimeter set up around it, holding the Viet Cong back.
Were most of these planes that you were experienced with? I mean, were they shot down by other other aircraft, or were they shot down from the ground?
From the ground, no. The Viet Cong had no airplanes in South Vietnam.
Okay.
Everything was ground fire. But our normal flight level is about 3,000 feet to fly over big areas and look down and observe. We had basically three types of flying. There was a routine that everybody had that they flew every day, almost every day,
Mhm.
to look for changes in piles of dirt or traffic movement or people doing things so that you got familiar with your piece of ground. And then there were special reconnaissance they would call out into other areas. And then there were the actual battles that we ran and directed from the air pretty much. I mean, we didn't direct them. We would give information to the commanders on the ground and call in artillery or call in an airstrike.
Mhm.
And then we would circle, typically mark the target with a smoke rocket or a smoke hand grenade,
Mhm.
and then call in an airstrike or something, set them up in the proper circle and get them lined up and find the target
Mhm.
based on where the smoke was. We didn't always hit with a hand grenade, a smoke grenade, you didn't always get it right on the target, but you could say, 50 feet to the left or right or whatever that, once you got them set up.
Mhm.
And then they would fly a circle around us, dropping ordnance, typically napalm, and burn whatever it was out of there.
Mhm.